Welcome back to the Shacknews E3 live show. We're here with Ash from the Ubisoft team. You are game director for Assassin's Creed Origins.
Yes, game director for Assassin's Creed Origins. We finally announced, which is wonderful. It's been a long road, 3.5 years.
It's out there for real publicly now. Yeah, it's exciting times.
It's official now.
There were no leaks whatsoever. You imagined those.
It was a tight ship, running in a tight ship. Yeah, we've announced the game. We have demos here at E3. So it's amazing to finally be able to talk about the game, to show it off, to have people play it and give us feedback. We started this game 3.5 years ago after Black Flag, so it's been a long road. We're thrilled that we're finally at the stage.
That's something I really want to ask you about. The Assassin's Creed series was on an annual cycle. Ubisoft very publicly said we are taking a year off. We are giving them an extra year of development. For Origins, what did that extra year give you? What did that mean for you guys?
Yeah, so when we started this project, we had this will, this intention to say, okay, we want to reinvent the experience of Assassin's Creed. Experience means narrative structure, the world, gameplay. So we were trying to really bring something new and fresh, modernize the series. At the same time, telling ourselves it needs to be somehow authentically AC. This naturally led us to doing a game about the story of the Brotherhood, how the Brotherhood came to be from AC1, that we knew in AC1. And then this needed an epic setting, so we went to ancient Egypt. And for all of this, at some point we realized, okay, we need the time to do this. Ubisoft as a company supported us. They believed in what we were doing. They allowed us to have the time to really push the combat, push the action RPG, make this majestic, ancient Egypt world come to life. And I'm very grateful that we've had the time to do this and that we're able to make the game we've been wanting to make.
And I'm someone who is kind of a lore nerd for Assassin's Creed personally.
Good.
I mean, Assassin's Creed 2 and 3 lean heavily into the Apple of Eden and the prophecy and all those sort of things. It feels like Egypt is a good way to go back to the roots of this having to do with the gods. Is that an element that you're playing with here?
Hence Origins, I would guess.
Hence Origins, yeah.
Stuff.
For sure, I mean the majesticness of ancient Egypt, the religions, the cultures, the landscape. We wanted to do this justice. We wanted to do it respect. At the same time, we go to 49 BCE. So concretely, that's the time period we go into. It's because we wanted an Egypt that already had centuries of grandeur, accomplishment, majesty to it, but that it was at its demise. The line of pharaohs is about to end. The gods are going to die. The way of Egypt, ancient Egypt, the way of life is going to drastically change. And in this crucible of history, this is what ends up leading to the birth of the Brotherhood. So, knowing that we're in this place of mysticism, fantasy, for sure we play with it. Why did the story have to take place in this time period? We made a character who is, Bayek, our hero, he is the physical embodiment of ancient Egypt. So he believes in the religions, the culture, the rituals, and the idea is, as his world is dying, who does he have to be or become or to do to be part of the new world? That's the adventure we go on with him. And so of course we touch the religions, the gods, the rituals, mummification, and why this stuff actually was important to the birth of the Brotherhood that we know from AC1.
Does that play into a modern day narrative in the same way that some earlier Assassin's Creeds did? I think later in the series it started to be less emphasized, I think it's fair to say. You would have the modern day segments, but they weren't as core a part of the story. Is this getting back to that?
So as we've just announced the game, the campaign is long. For today, we're not talking about anything outside of Egypt, ancient Egypt. What I'll say is, we know our series, we know our brand, we know our fans, we listen to our fans. And as I said, we wanted to make something that was an authentic AC experience, but refreshing that experience. So that's all I'll say for now.
Expert level pivot. That's how you get to be game director of a series.
We've seen the gameplay. There were some thugs that had Roman armor on and then maybe stole off a dead warrior. That's about as big as deep as we can figure right now. Guess where the show will go and where the game will go at this point.
Well, we are in the time period of the ascension of Cleopatra.
That's true.
So, Assassin's Creed, we say history is our playground. So obviously we're going to meet these crazy historic figures, real life figures, these big events. Fundamentally, the story is a personal story for Bayek, the people in his life and their journey. But ultimately, it is an AC, so playing with history is super important to us.
Egyptian also has, like, they have great weapons. Like, they have great, flashy, cool-looking weapons. Like
really brutal looking.
Yeah,
like
oh
my God,
sword.
That's awful weapon.
Sword.
Yeah, so like, what did that open up for you creatively to have access to all those awesome, historic, accurate weapons? You know.
So so Bayek is what we call a Medjai, which is an ancient line of warriors, actual warriors.
You've seen The Mummy, right? You get him.
We're taking that over. We're owning that. So these
Tom Cruise movie isn't, so
not that one. The good one. Sorry, go.
So our hero is a Medjai. So these guys were proficient with many different styles of fighting and weapons. So this has allowed us to open the door on the combat side of things. We wanted to refresh the combat to actually bring in a different paradigm completely. So we've gone to a combat system that's more hitbox driven. It's a bit technical, but effectively it means when you press attack, you're going to swing your weapon regardless of what's in front of you. So if there's an enemy, they'll be hit. If there isn't, well, you just swung in open air and you expose yourself. So all of a sudden what this does is the speed of my weapon, the length of my weapon, its strength, where the enemies are, what's their loadout, all of a sudden matters in the gameplay. And so this allowed us to give true value, gameplay value, to spears, to the Kopesh sword, to big maces and double-handed axes and dual swords. So we have a plethora of weapon types, many bow types as well, because bows were really important at this time.
Yes.
We wanted to make sure that the shooter mechanic of the game was really powerful if you want to play that ranger play style. So we've gone deep on weapons. So yes, Egypt has offered us some really cool opportunities to push the combat element of the game.
And for those of you who aren't at E3 to be able to play this game, I played it a little bit before the show,
yes.
And I can say, like, I know how much game directors love being compared to other games, but the combat feels kind of like Breath of the Wild. Your dodges are very important. You can shield parry, you can, there's a ton of different stuff you can do, and you're not afraid to throw more than one enemy at you at once. You're not afraid to do that.
We do not shy away from that, and it's an honor to be compared.
To be in the company, yeah.
I mean, it was definitely the change Assassin's Creed needed. It needed a change. It needed to be strung up. It needed to be revamped. It was definitely everything that the game needed to continue to evolve and be successful.
That's absolutely wonderful to hear. It's actually why, as we announced, we had playable demos. We didn't want it to just be a message just coming for us. We actually want people to play it and to see that, okay, this has changed.
The way you describe it, it sounds very technical. And near the end of the last era of Assassin's Creed, like it was getting to the point that you could be surrounded by guys and pretty easily just kind of take them all down.
Yeah,
you were a whirling dervish of death, and this sounds like
I think that's
really
the first time I heard that.
Yeah, you kind of need to consider your strikes, consider your animations, like commit to a strike and know when you're doing it.
Speaking of, like, did you actually talk to the For Honor team at all? Because it seems like it's that kind of deep combat. You know what I mean? Like it's not For Honor combat, but it's definitely deep. Like it's that deep contextual combat.
I'm super happy for the For Honor team. They've done something really beautiful and amazing. But we started this game 3.5 years ago, and it was actually one of the first things we pushed for is to challenge the way we do combat in AC. So for sure we talk amongst ourselves, but it's our goal was to shift the paradigm of combat, to modernize the series, to actually bring in a very deep action RPG element. So even with the weapons, there's the behavior element of speed, distance covering, all this. But we also wanted that as you progress through the game and you collect different weapons that have different levels, different stats and attributes, different rarities, that this can also start enhancing the way you fight. And what I mean by that is, the way you fight with a poison-tipped spear is very different than a Kopesh that can do bleeding damage. And these are the layers of depth that we want people who, if they're gonna sink 40, 50 hours into this game, that the game is constantly rewarding them, proposing them new ideas, new ways of fighting. And if you're a stealth fan, well, you can go down that road and that's super cool as well. And we put a lot of effort on the stealth side of things. We really wanted that gameplay depth had meaning and value for our players. So we push for that.
So
Can you talk about the? Oh, sorry. You want to go, Steve?
So what are the core? You talked about sort of taking Assassin's Creed back to its beginnings and really re-examining. What are the core bits that you knew you couldn't touch for it to be an Assassin's Creed game, versus what needed a little revision, and even what you thought, okay, we can drop this. This isn't really core to the franchise.
So, in terms of gameplay and let's say narrative and this kind of stuff, there was nothing off limits. We were really saying to ourselves, we're going to do the game we feel is the best AC experience we can make, revamping the experience. For sure, on the lore side, we're sticking to the lore. That is, we hold sacred, to the lore. It's one thing that people ask us, if this is the birth of the Brotherhood, what about the assassins before this time, like Darius and Eltani? And we know they're there. This holds true to it. We actually even play with that a little bit. The story here is that it's the Brotherhood that we know from AC1 in terms of their tenets, their symbology, their rituals. The cut finger ritual, for example. What is the story behind that? Did one guy just decide to cut his finger off? It's a little bit more involved than that. So we play with that for sure. So the lore we held sacred too, but in terms of the elements of the game, the mechanics, the world building, everything was up for grabs. We did keep some of the legacy elements that we felt were an homage to the series. So for example, Leap of Faith, having viewpoints. They work slightly differently in this game, but that idea of going on a high point and kind of having this majestic view of the world, we wanted to keep that as an homage to the series. It's not exactly the same as it was before. But there were little tidbits of the series that we kept for, out of a choice to keep it. But really, everything was up for grabs in terms of experience.
And speaking of high points, Assassin's Creed has been really defined by its environment in a lot of ways. When it was in Jerusalem, it was very like, I'm usually on the rooftops, I'm skulking around. All the people down there, I don't really have to mess with them, they're just down there. And then there have been ones that have been closer to the ground. The Revolution, you were sort of on the ground. And then London obviously was very like, again, rooftops. So what's Egypt like in that respect? Are you out of the fray? Are you out of the streets, or are you down with the people?
Yeah, and how much liberty do you take with, because there was a lot of really high architecture in the cities. I mean, you had the pyramids and stuff, and they didn't have like 100-foot towers you could build up.
So in terms of the world, we have a couple major cities. So there's Alexandria, there's Memphis, the ancient city of Memphis. They have their own vibe.
Not the modern city of Memphis or anything.
No, we have, and we have actually, there's many cities in the game and many villages. And so temples were huge. Memphis is organic and wild, and it's a much older city. And so you have these giant monuments, like these bigger than life monuments that people can climb and run around on. Alexandria is much more metropolitan. It's much more organized. You have the Great Library of Alexandria, the Pharos, the lighthouse. So these cities have their own flavor. And so, for example, being on rooftops in Memphis, that was the intention, because the height variation is very organic. So you have one-floor buildings that go to 2, then 3, then massive temples. Whereas Alexandria, the buildings are taller. So here you're naturally, let's say, running more in the streets. Of course, we have free run paths that get you up there. And then you have villages. We have tons of villages. And again, we play with the heights. I think in the demo, I don't know if you went to Umaria, which is a small village.
The combat just enticed me. I was just doing combat the whole time. Honestly, I couldn't get enough of it.
I was just stabbing dudes over and over.
Yeah, it just felt so fluidic and perfect. I could not kill things.
Wow, I don't even need to be here. Can you want to do the interview with him? No, it's thank you for saying that. It's a pleasure to hear. I love hearing that. It's why we want people to play the game. But the village, it's a very organic village, so going onto rooftops is very easy, and that's what we wanted for these villages. So we actually play with that in terms of, do we want you to be, let's say, on the ground? Do we want you on the roofs? It's something we play with. We have a lot of locations in the world. We know our series well, and we've picked the best of what we thought works in this sort of level design philosophy.
So something I really want to touch on before we have to go. We were talking about this before the show. People ask all the time, how do you get into game development? How do you get into game journalism? You came up through Shack partly. Like, can you talk? Well, as we are in our
Sugar
lovely
Shack.
posh
Yes.
Shack booth
Yeah.
here,
Shack.
our Shack.
Yes, this logo here brings back
and so
many memories.
I have to ask you, like, very quickly, like,
Of course.
what's your roots to Shacknews?
Oh, it's my pleasure to talk about it. No, when I was before my career started years ago, I used to make mods with friends. It started with Quake 2, Quake 3. We were very young, we were little kids. And then we went to Unreal Tournament. And we were heavy on Shack, Sugar Shack.
Sugar Shack, as it was called in the
Sugar
day,
Shack
yeah.
back in the day. And we had this very strong community that supported us with our mods. We made a mod called Checkmate, which was a team deathmatch game. Which honestly, if you look at Overwatch, you can almost see that we were thinking in those lines. not saying that Overwatch took anything. They're amazing, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I fanboy over them, but it was anyway. So we made this mod, and Sugar Shack totally supported us. The community was there for us. It was absolutely beautiful and wonderful. And there was this one user, one kid. His name was KB Nerd. He wrote this little blurb that put me on cloud nine. It was like, this is why we make this stuff. It's for other people to fall in love with these little worlds we create, to derive pleasure and enjoyment out of them. And he wrote this thing, and I actually contacted you guys a few years ago because I couldn't find it. I couldn't find his quote, and you guys helped me out. You brought it for me. I was presenting something about like what it truly means to make video games. And so for me, Shack has been there from the beginning of my career, and it's a pleasure to be here with you guys.
Look how far you've come. You're a game director for one of the biggest franchises around.
You want to get into games?
Yeah.
Go to Shack.
Go to Shacknews.
Start with Shacknews. Your career will fly from that point.
That's great. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you again, man.
We'll be back with more live from the E3 show floor on Shacknews.